welcome back to AWS On Air, live at the Washington, D.C. Summit. My name is Aaron Hunter, and with me we have a couple of our friends who are going to talk to us about something new with AWS Config. Well, let's go ahead and have them introduce themselves first.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Gilliman. I'm a principal specialist here at AWS for our Cloud Ops group, and AWS Config is one of my services that I support.
Hello everybody, my name is Isaiah Salinas. I'm a specialist solution architect, also work with the cloud operation teams and specialize in AWS Config.
So AWS Config, let's kind of set the stage here and talk what is AWS Config, what kind of problems does AWS Config solve for our customers, and what are you here to talk about today?
Sure, so AWS Config is our resource tracking service here at AWS, and so what it does is as you make changes or updates to your resources, it's tracking those changes, and then it has a rule engine that is able to go in and look at those changes and see if they're compliant with the desired state that you have as a customer. And that desired state could be something dealing with a framework like NIST 853 or HIPAA or SOC 2. And so we evaluate those, and you can do things like auto remediations. Let's say if the customer has an open S3 bucket to the world, you could automatically shut that thing down and keep everything secure. So in a nutshell, that's what AWS Config is and what it does.
So it sounds like it's kind of a proactive compliance way of making things change, and I imagine because we're here live at the DC Summit, a lot of compliance requirements is needed for government officials. So can you tell us more about proactive compliance with AWS using Config?
Yeah, so originally, AWS Config has been more of a detective portion where once the changes happen, that's when we do it. Whereas what we've launched recently has been the proactive side. Customers really want us to shift more left. We're not calling it preventative yet, because that's a whole different ball game. But what we're actually going to show today will show how you can use proactive in a preventative measure.
So it's more detective, right? So it's detecting a change in some kind of configuration.
The current way, yes.
Yes.
The preventative way is more of putting it into your CI/CD pipeline.
Okay.
So yeah, we're actually going to show that today, as well as how you can turn that into a proactive or preventative yourself.
Got it, cool. And you talked about AWS Config rules and rule sets. Can you explain more about what those are? And I'm hoping Isaiah is going to show us as well.
Yeah, so definitely I'll go ahead and demo it for you today. So if you're going to go ahead and utilize, for example, here I have a managed rule that we have for RDS storage encrypted. It's basically checking if your RDS instance is to have its storage encrypted. And you can actually set this rule as a proactive rule. So take a look at my Cloud9 environment here and just take a look at what a CloudFormation template would look like. I'm defining an RDS instance. Now, if I were going to use the CLI commandment to do a proactive check, what I can do is I'm going to put
you on the spot here. For that Cloud9 environment, can we expand the text a little bit for our viewers watching live?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. And then while you're doing that, I saw on the rule set that you had listed, you talked about AWS managed, and then you also had a custom Lambda. So we can come back to that later. That'd be cool.
Yep. So in here, I'm basically running the CLI command, passing in the resource block from that CloudFormation template for the RDS instance.
Yeah.
It's basically going to use a CLI command to go ahead and initiate an evaluation. Once I got that evaluation, I get an ID. And so I'm going to go ahead and just grab the CLI command to do that. So I'm just going to go and copy that here. And I will run it here together with this evaluation ID.
So you need both?
You need both.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one will actually do the proactive check. So it's actually going to check that resource against your rules defined for that resource type.
Got it.
The next one is then going to retrieve the actual output of that evaluation. So if you notice here, it basically returned it as a non-compliant because that template had storage defined as false for being encrypted.
Yeah. So you're doing this through CloudFormation, is that right? I see CFN hook.
Exactly. So I was going to mention, now what you can do is you can take that CLI steps that I do, that multi-step, and put it into a custom hook.
Okay.
So in my Cloud9 environment, for an example, we have a custom hook that basically shows that we're actually calling the actual proactive API for config.
Okay. So is this a requirement where we have to use CloudFormation hooks?
No, this actually, you can utilize the API call that I just showed you.
Yeah.
For that process, you would need to integrate something, build a custom solution to do that within your CI/CD pipeline. So you can do it. It's not required. What's nice about the CloudFormation hook is that you can evaluate more than one resource at a time.
Got it.
Versus using the CLI, you have to do each evaluation one resource at a time.
That sounds very labor intensive.
Yeah,
it's almost as bad as ClickOps.
So let me show you briefly here how I can go ahead and go to my CloudFormation.
And while you're waiting for that to load, we talked about the CLI, the disadvantages of having to do it line by line. You could still iterate over that and kind of do like a bash script, but it's not optimal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where it's not optimal. The management is a lot. Implementing that in a CI/CD pipeline for your workflow, it requires a lot. Utilizing the hook, which I'm going to show you here, is just you got the hook and you deploy it, it's going to take care of it for you.
Awesome.
So let me show you. I'm going to go ahead and upload a template that has the storage encryption set to false.
Ooh, a YAML fan. Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this, and we'll say this RDS demo, and we'll click next and accept all the defaults.
YAML versus JSON is always one of those like controversial topics. Is it GIF or is it GIF? Is it YAML or is it JSON?
Sure. So it's doing the creation process. As you can see, it's already starting that demo testing config hook.
Yes.
It failed. And I was expecting it to fail.
Okay.
Because
that's
in
good.
in the CloudFormation template, I had the storage encryption set to false.
Because we're doing demos live, if it's failing live.
So if you can see here, it actually tells you hook failed, resources non-compliant.
Okay.
So let me go ahead and create another stack, and I'm going to deploy another template. The only difference with this template is that it now has storage encryption set to true. So that should evaluate against my config rule saying, yes, it is compliant.
In the template itself?
In the template itself.
Okay. So it'll proactively prevent you from launching services that are already out of compliance. It took me way too long to get that word out.
So what it's doing is basically when I'm deploying this CloudFormation template, the hook is intercepting the template.
Okay.
And then taking all the resources, and based on the hook, what resource types it supports, it then will evaluate it against the config rules. If there's any config rules that it's non-compliant, it'll fail the hook. So
I imagine, I work with customers a lot who deploy CloudFormation templates, and they can use CloudFormation. We're not here to talk specifically about it, but they use it to detect drift. And this is kind of a step before that. So if you're launching something, you can prevent the CloudFormation template from launching a resource that falls outside of the parameters. It's pretty powerful.
Let me go ahead and just change the name.
And it's all powered by AWS Config.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and deploy it here. All right. So this is going to do the same process, but we should expect it now to pass the custom hook that we created and start creating the instance. So let's go ahead and take a look at there. It says hook invocation completed. And so we actually look at the output of the hook. Here it says hook completed successfully, resource is compliant.
All right.
So it gives an example how you can utilize AWS Config Proactive together with CloudFormation's hooks to add that preventative measure, because proactive is going to give you the status of it, but then you have to you have to decide what you want to do with it.
Got it.
That's where CloudFormation hooks come into hand, because CloudFormation hooks is already going to decide for you and fail the creation of that resource.
Got it. Okay. Seems pretty powerful. And then I see here hook invocation details complete, resource creation initiated, and we did see earlier on your rule set that you talked about. If you can go back to that tab for me real quick, AWS Managed and Custom Lambda. So I wanted to keep the promise to all of our viewers here. What's a custom Lambda?
So a custom Lambda, so AWS Config supports both custom rules for backed by Lambda functions or backed by CloudFormation Guard.
Okay.
So if you want to create a custom rule definition for config outside of the managed rules that we provide, within AWS, you would have to utilize either a Lambda function or a CloudFormation Guard policy.
Got it. And that's another question that I have. Does Proactives currently support custom rules?
Yes, it will support custom rules either backed by Lambda or backed by CloudFormation Guard if it's one of the supported resource types that Proactive does support.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left. Can we talk about pricing real quick?
Sure.
It seems like this is pretty expensive because it does a whole lot of stuff. What does this cost me?
Well, if you're using proactive and detective, we don't actually charge you for the proactive at all.
No, really? Okay. So you're using proactive and detective. No charge for proactive.
Correct.
Amazing.
So if you're only using proactive, then it's just billed at the normal rate of config. So
I like that.
Yeah.
More money in my wallet, more money for ice cream on a hot summer day.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Very cool. What else do you want to show us today about proactive or talk about?
Just that, go ahead and give it a try. If you haven't utilized AWS Config Proactive yet, you may be utilizing some of the managed rules that we already are listing.
Okay.
Our documentation does outline all those managed rules and also the supported resource types. So definitely give it a try. See how you can implement that within your CI/CD pipeline. You'll see that it's going to provide a way where you can centralize those compliance requirements. Because before you had to have two sets of policies for your CI/CD pipeline.
Yes.
Now with Proactive, you can put them in one central location where you have your config rule definition, allowing you to do both.
Awesome.
So the management becomes a little bit more easier to manage in that aspect.
Cool. One more question. I'm so sorry. Just thought of it. We did a lot of stuff here in the console. Can I call APIs directly using it? Can I programmatically make calls?
Yeah. Definitely. So it has the API call. So like what I showed you here on the CloudFormation hook, this is doing the API call utilizing Python, the start resource evaluation.
Got it.
What I showed you earlier through the CLI command, same thing. So basically anything that the SDK supports, you can go ahead and utilize proactive in that method too as well.
See, evaluation mode equals proactive, evaluation timeout equals 30 on lines 44 and 45 here. Eval status in progress.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through maybe more of what this is doing for our viewers that are watching us live?
Sure. So this particular area right here is actually calling the start resource evaluation in a CloudFormation hook. It's passing in the resource ID, the resource type being one of the supported resources. So you're passing in their RDS instance type or so forth.
Yep.
Then you're passing in the resource schema. So this is actually taking what the CloudFormation schema is for that resource, passing it in there, and this will match up with your CloudFormation template where you're defining a resource scenario there.
I see that.
And then down below in this area right here, it's basically going to do the evaluation. So in our CLI command, we had that evaluation ID.
Yep.
So this is where it's basically going to iterate and basically check that evaluation ID and basically return what was the status. Was it compliant, non-compliant, not applicable?
Okay.
And then basically, based on that response, will then trigger a specific output for that. So if it's not applicable, it'll basically continue. If it's compliant, it will continue logging that information. If it's non-compliant, it'll actually fail the actual CloudFormation deployment of that too as well. So
got it.
That's one way how you can utilize CloudFormation hooks for that.
And I see right here on line 65, it says log info sleeping. So it's almost like maybe it needs to take a nap after doing all that work.
Yeah, because depending on how many config rules you have, it may be evaluating the various different config rules. In our demo here, we only had one config rule.
Okay.
So if you had multiple config rules, it will need to evaluate each of those config rules and wait for a response from those evaluations.
It's pretty cool. How much of this did you write using Amazon Code Whisperer? So we can go ahead and dig into that later on. But you know what? For all of our friends watching us, we have about 90 seconds left. Where do they go to learn more about this new feature?
We have various blogs around CloudFormation hooks, and then we also have a launch release blogs when we release Proactive that they can go and learn more about Proactive too as well.
So they can just type in AWS Config.
Proactive.
AWS Config, Proactive. I'm doing this live, everyone. I'm going to see if I can find it. AWS Config rules now support proactive compliance, November 28, 2022. Is that the right one?
Yeah, and there's a blog article too as well.
I see all of that. So just go ahead and type AWS Config Proactive in your favorite search engine. Go ahead and reach out to the config team if you have any questions. You can do that through most of our documentation. You can provide feedback there directly. Make sure to follow us on twitch.tv/AWS On Air. And stay tuned for more live from the AWS Summit in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.